So my name is Kaylee and today I am joined with Rachel, who is an archaeologist from Scotland, and we are going to talk about the hypothesis that I've created in my mind about the ancient world, that monuments could be reconstructions of earlier structures. I've made a video about this in the past and I'll link it in the description down below, and you can see the thumbnail here on the screen. But before I go into it, I would like to quickly mention that this particular video is sponsored by Dungeon Hunter 6. As always, more on the sponsor later in the video. I just want to say, let's get into it. We don't need to talk about, what I've already spoken about. We need to talk about the opinion, the archaeological opinion of Rachel. So, Rachel, you've seen my video and you know my hypothesis that some, not all, but some ancient structures, like for instance, temples in Malta, or more importantly, structures in Ireland like Newgrange and Carrowmore, could be structures that have been reconstructed over earlier structures. So let the viewer know what you think about this, and could it be a possibility?
So I think it's a good question to ask, and I can totally understand why you would come to that hypothesis for these kinds of structures. And also I think it's really good that you mentioned that it's maybe a some, not all.
In a world where darkness rules, where bosses seem invincible, there's a twist waiting for you. Dungeon Hunter 6. Defeat bosses and make them your allies. Experience the thrill of not just conquering, but commanding over 100 uniquely designed bosses. Embrace your inner feline on stealth missions or ride majestic creatures in this epic mobile APRG adventure. Optimized 3D graphics, real-time guild wars, and monthly updates. Endless fun awaits. Ready to dive in? Download now for free on Android and iOS. Use the link in the description or scan this QR code on your PC for a special $50 starter pack, only available for the next 30 days. And starting October 15th, participate in the launch Lucky Spin event with your game account for a chance to win prizes like an iPhone 15 Pro Max, PS5 and more. Dungeon Hunter 6, where bosses bend to your will, or at least you can do your best.
Because it is really important to make this distinction between a lot of these monuments, that they're not all the same. There's a difference if we're speaking about megalithic structures, for example. There's a difference between ones that are tombs. There's also the whole entire henge monument system, which is some of them are tombs and some of them don't seem to be tombs. You also have just like independent standing stones and all that kind of stuff. So it's really key a lot of the times to remember that just because something might be true for one instance, that doesn't necessarily mean it's applicable for everything. So in terms of could they be reconstructions of earlier wooden structures, based upon what I know, it hasn't been demonstrated archaeologically that this is the case from what we've been able to excavate so far. That does not mean that can't be something that we discover in the future. And it doesn't mean that it's not at all a possibility, but it would say that it's probably not the most likely possibility. So, and that's because in terms of what we have excavated so far, if there were wooden remains, or if there had been activity there previously that involved wood or a different phase of activity, we would be able to see that stratigraphically. So, if they were putting wooden posts into post holes and then they replaced those posts with stones, we would be able to see that there is a difference in that deposition via the stratigraphy in terms of the reuse. And it wouldn't just necessarily be something that we would expect to see only in one instance. That would be something we would be probably seeing across a site. So even if perhaps they were able to, completely dig out the remains for one wooden post and replace it with one stone, the likelihood that they would do that consistently across a site be able to do that is less likely. Also, I was looking into Carrowmore in particular, the one that you mentioned in your video.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting because they talk about this one radiocarbon date that they have from it, which is, I think it's 5600 BCE, and it's the highest date. And everyone's like, oh, what is that? And there's a lot of debate about it. And so the reasons for why a lot of that controversy is because a lot of these monuments that you're talking about are associated with the Neolithic period, the new Stone Age, and the Neolithic Revolution, and the bringing of basically the principles of agriculture and civilization, and it is eventually it is, you know, arguably one of the biggest advances in human technology that allowed us to progress to where we are today. Like, I really can't understate how important it is as a period in time. So the idea that this date from Carrowmore is before the Neolithic and would have been potentially placed part of the monument as being during a time of more of a hunter-gatherer oriented society, what is the controversial part. Looking at the research, I think it's pretty clear that while that date is interesting, we probably have to look at it as a bit of an outlier and like the least likely possibility for a few different reasons. So have you heard of the old wood problem when it comes to radiocarbon dating?
No, I haven't. Explain.
Okay, so radiocarbon dating, as you say in your video, it dates the carbon that's present in a biological organism at the time of its death. So the problem when it comes to wood is that it's entirely possible for us to chop down a tree and then still use it for a long time after that tree has died. So we cannot always rely on a piece of wood in an archaeological context as being entirely representative of a date, because it's entirely possible that that wood might be a few hundred years older than when it was actually deposited in that feature. Is that okay? So that's one reason. But I will say that Bernhardt or Bernhorlt, how do you say his name again? Goran
Burenhult.
Goran. So I will say that Goran Burenhult has rebutted people who've kind of said, oh, well, this outlier date is an old wood problem, by saying that he is quite confident that it's a secure context that it was taken from. But it's an outlier. It's the only instance of this kind of a date in an entire suite of dates that were sampled. If there were more dates that also agreed with that, I'd be more likely to give it credence. But the fact that it's an outlier, to me, says, oh, I don't really know how reliable it is for making the kind of statements that have been made about it. Additionally, if you look at the 2013 paper that re-examined some carbon, that redid some of the dates for Carrowmore, they do note in the paper that a lot of the research that is known about Carrowmore, it's all been provided by this one person, and a lot of their sources come from, for this other paper, come from interim excavation reports and not the final publication of the site. So the site itself hasn't been completely fully published, to my knowledge. So I'm pretty sure he's probably still working on that, which highlights a whole other thing in archaeology, of this thing where you excavate sites for 20 years and you spend so much of your career doing it, but then you have to spend the rest of your life publishing it because you have so much information to get through. And so this redoing of the dates paper notes that even in some of the samples that they were looking at, there were inconsistencies in where the sample comes from and between the different reports and the different that Goran produced. So for example, there's this 2003 stones and bones presentation and paper that he gave, there's a sample that was used for it that's described as being charcoal from a stone socket. But there's no information from the interim excavation report that supports that this context existed for this charcoal, and there's no record of stone sockets within that monument. So he used it in one, but he doesn't use it in another. So to me, that says that means that the recording isn't really entirely consistent. So you can't take it as like Bible, as the Kardashians would say. Also, I think it's important to highlight that there can be differences between that we need to be aware that there's a difference between the date of a piece of charcoal and the date of what's around it. You're dating that particular piece of charcoal. You can make interpretations based on where it is in the stratigraphy that it's likely that this then corresponds to everything around it, but until we can date the stones, we can't necessarily say 100% that this is that the charcoal comes from the exact same time as the stone. We can be fairly confident. So the other thing that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about these kinds of sites that I actually read in some of the papers that in prepping for this interview was we need to keep in mind as well that these are sites that were probably used over like a pretty long period of time, and there is a difference between when they were constructed and different parts of when they were used and reused. So especially when you're looking at something like the burial radiocarbon dates, those can be from a whole range of the period of the use. And I know that a lot of the radiocarbon dates that were used for the construction of the monument were from like the foundational deposits around it. So it's key to remember that different dates come from different parts of the monument, and that just because it was constructed at one point, it also probably went through phases of construction as well. So example for someone like Newgrange, it might look different now to how when it was first constructed.
Yeah. So for me, like, one of the reasons I started thinking about like this hypothesis had to do with Newgrange and the fact that in the 1960s it was reconstructed. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm aware, I've read most of the excavation papers back when I made my video on Newgrange in 2020. And as far as I'm aware, most of the site was like actually dug up. And then they reconstructed Newgrange, which is the infamous, like it's the famous, beautiful monument, and I would love to visit it one day. But the reason that got me thinking was, is it possible that if like a catastrophic event happened to our civilization in the near future, and humanity doesn't necessarily die out, there are people that will continue and they have to start kind of from scratch and all that stuff. Like it's kind of like the preface of the ancient advanced civilization stuff. But like we get to a point where we can again date things and research things, and humanity has progressed to that point. If they were to date Newgrange in like a 1,000 years from now, let's say, could they come up with a different date, like an older date than we came up back when we excavated it in the 60s? Could they come up with a date around 1960? Or will they find a date that we found like 3,400 years ago? 3,400 BCE. I'm sorry, I'm blonde.
Anyway, so if question of if things were destroyed 1960s, I'm going to preface this by saying, as I am an archaeologist, but I do not specialize in C14 and radiocarbon dating, so I'm not going to be able to present you with some really like detailed scientific numbers, but I do understand the concept and that it's based off of. So personally, this idea of a cataclysmic event that wipes everything out and then we come back and we have to look at the dolmens, I have a hard time believing, no offense, that if there was a cataclysmic event like that, that it would wipe out our entire civilization and all records of our civilization and just leave those megalithic monuments. Like there's not really, conceivably in my mind, a way for them to survive, but not concrete structures.
So it's like, where's the trash?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, it just doesn't, it's like selective, it's like, it would be a selective event. So, right, like it would have to be something that's strong enough to destroy concrete and like asphalt and pavement and all these other, like what you would think of as like strong non-organic materials that we currently use, but not strong enough to destroy stone monuments like
yeah. Although like asphalt and cement or like concrete, it will disintegrate over time compared to like stone. So like if it could be like cataclysmic enough so that only a small group of people survives and they have to like continue and it takes them a couple hundred years, then there wouldn't be much left from like, I think, asphalt and like concrete.
Maybe not, but I'm not an expert in those materials.
Yeah.
The other thing that struck me when you asked me this question is, do you play video games?
Yeah.
Do you play Horizon Zero Dawn? Is that where this came from?
Partially.
Because, well, I ask because I feel like that game, I played that video game, and I spent the entire video game being like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen. This is how our civilization, like I could see this being a progression of what happens to humanity. But one of the interesting things that I think about when I look at that game is this idea of, humanity were able in a way to predict their end, and they were able to prepare for it. And one of those ways was taking all like human knowledge and culture and putting it into these programs that were supposed to reteach us our history and everything. And in the game, those things get destroyed on Earth, but they actually end up surviving because there's a backup system.
Yeah.
So I think, a backup system would survive. I also think it's an interesting concept because it draws on some things that we're already doing in modern day. Have you heard of Svalbard?
Yeah.
The Doomsday Vault, right? So like, I feel like if Svalbard isn't going to survive a cataclysmic event, Newgrange is definitely not going to survive it either.
Honestly, I have to agree with you on that. And for the people who don't know what Svalbard is, just Google it. Like Google is free.
It's a seed bank. They've dug it somewhere in Norway, and it's designed to survive doomsday or major events that would set us back a long time. Anyway, so there's that. And then in terms of the question about the radiocarbon and what would the date come back if we've like excavated this and then put it back, it depends on essentially your archaeological methods and what you are sampling for carbon-14 dating. So people think carbon-14, you're dating the soil. You're not really. You're dating organic materials that are in that soil that they get separated out during the sampling process, and then those are sent away and dated. So you can date things like peat. I guess that would be an example of a kind of soil but it's not really soil, it's peat. I don't really know how else to explain it. That is probably the thing that is most easily contaminated by modern material, like by roots or something that's growing down into it. Also, you have an issue where the older something is, the harder it is to radiocarbon date because the carbon has decayed so much, there's less of it. So that can have a problem. But in terms of if we're looking at specifically at Newgrange or specifically Carramore, because that is the one that has the C14 dates that we can look at, the kinds of things that they're dating at Carramore, for example, are charcoal, antler bone pins, and human teeth. So those are all very solid things. And in order to radiocarbon date those, what a lab essentially has to do is drill into them to retrieve the sample from inside of them. So the likelihood of us having put everything back and then they re-excavate it, and then they look at the charcoal samples again, it is very unlikely that those samples would be contaminated. The inside of those samples would be contaminated to return back that date. That being said, I would also think that the archaeologists of this hypothetical future, if they have access to radiocarbon dating and not a different kind of dating that's perhaps a bit more sophisticated than what we currently use, they would be able to tell that something has happened at that site that makes it not entirely secure in terms of we know it's 100% original. And so they would be, and so they'd be able to tell, but they might not be able to tell exactly what happens if perhaps they don't have access to any kind of records of this excavation that we've left. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And then I want to look into we also do luminescence dating on like soil, because that's soil dating. So if they were to progress to the point of being able to use luminescence dating, and they use that to date the soil, like for instance Newgrange's soil, would they come up with a date of like the 1960s or the older date of 3400 BCE? Because it was, like, to my understanding, nearly completely dug up, I think. I mean, they really excavated Newgrange like very thoroughly.
Yeah. Again, not having read the book on Newgrange, it's hard to say absolutely, but I think it's this question of not what would the answering date be, but it would be more of like, why would they date it? Because as I said, they'd be able to tell that something's happening. So when you're dating something using these kinds of methods, you want to be able to tell that it's from a completely secure deposit that has like no evidence of tampering.
Yeah.
So in my mind, you would be able to tell that there's evidence of tampering at which you would have been able to tell as you excavated the site, which would mean they might go and they might do the bioluminescence dating, but they would be doing multiple samples of it, because again, you just don't want to rely on just one. And then you would have to see what exactly is going to come up from that. And even though I'm sure they excavated Newgrange very thoroughly, that doesn't mean that they 100%ed it, as we say.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, I wouldn't be surprised, and I could be wrong, and you can edit this out or you can check it if you want, if they left bulks in when they were doing the excavation. Because a lot of the time when you see barrows, not necessarily Newgrange, but these kind of like mounded hills from the Bronze Age, which is a different time period, I'm aware, but similar kind of structure of monument, we end up having these cross sections across it like this, and you excavate the quadrants around it, but you kind of, a lot of the time you leave this in because this helps you look at your stratigraphy, etc. So if they have left something like these bulks in, then those have been untouched.
Yeah.
So someone coming back, and then they would be able to look and say the bioluminescence dating for one part said 1960s, and then the other part said this. Then they'd be looking at it and be like, there's something going on here.
And it's not like our archaeologists at this point in time have experienced that kind of thing at a site.
No.
Just wanted to make sure, because like the idea, to me, it's still the reason, like this hypothesis, it has to do with Newgrange. That was like kind of the basis of the idea. But the reason I thought of it has to do with the fact that we have stone structures in Turkey, like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, the entire Taştepeler site. And then for thousands of years, we don't use stone to construct monuments. And then suddenly we have the tombs in Carrowmore, like the Dolmen, tomb number 4, like it's the oldest there. Even keeping out the outlier of tomb number 4, it's still the oldest. And then after monuments have been erected and structured in Ireland, we somehow jump to Malta and then we start building there. And I'm like, but wait, there's a gap of like more than 7,000 years between Göbekli Tepe and that outlier date of tomb number 4 in Karamor. So what were we doing for 7,000 years? Like, were we only making structures with wood?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things going on here. So the dates that I've seen for Göbekli Tepe is kind of the oldest date is around 9,500 BCE. And then Karamor, it's 5,600 BCE, right?
Yeah.
So it's 4,000 years.
4,000 years.
Sorry.
No, that's good.
Just want to clarify.
Like to say it like this, it's more like the accepted dates are further apart.
Yes. Yeah. The accepted dates are thousands of years apart for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the thinking with this involves our internal bias that we have as a person in modern day, which is something that everyone has. And it's something that you kind of really have to consciously like discard when you're thinking about the past. So in this case, I think it applies in terms of when we think of modern day, we're used to things like technology and big ideas developing very quickly and then also spreading globally very, very quickly because we're just so much more connected and in sync. So my example I would use for this is something like, the iPhone. When that was invented, it was available worldwide. But this isn't the case in prehistory because obviously they're not as advanced as we are. And our concept of how long it takes to develop and spread things has to correspond to that lack of connection. It's really the growth of humanity in a lot of ways is very like exponential when you think about it. It starts off pretty slow. It takes us a long time to kind of come up with some of these core concepts. But then once we start this like trend of innovation and invention, all of a sudden it just kind of starts to take off, right? Like
it snowballs.
You think about, it snowballs. So like, from the beginning of the Stone Age and like the Paleolithic to the Neolithic is very, very long. And then you have the invention of farming and civilization, and then like the invention of farming and civilization to the Industrial Revolution, I think is a lot shorter, right? So so we have to kind of think about it that way. Also, this idea of like geographic spread. So these concepts are invented in the Middle East in the Fertile Crescent, which is currently around Iraq and Syria and the Tigris and the Euphrates. And then it has to take time to then spread to Anatolia and Turkey, which is where Göbekli Tepe is. And then it has to spread throughout Europe. And the diffusion of farmers bringing these concepts across Europe is somewhere that takes like 2,500 years. And it's very gradual. It's also not something that happened evenly across the board everywhere. There's places in where the Neolithic period lasted for a lot longer in China and Scandinavia than it did in other places, right? So then the question is like, well, as you said, like, why does it take so long? Well, again, there's a couple different reasons. It's not, it's not just like a straight up. There's going to be waves to these things as people migrate. And we need to the amount of travel that they had to go is one thing. It is, as you said in your video, it's very far away. Ireland is about as far away as you could get from that region in Turkey. But also we need to think about, these ideas of the motivation of traveling. We think of now, this is where I'm talking about this bias that we have nowadays. You have an idea, you're like, I need to put this somewhere, I need to prove this, I need to spread this idea as far as I can. And that's great, but a lot of the time when I think of people in those like in the Neolithic and the Mesolithic, their primary motivation when they come up with new ideas is not, I don't think, going to be entirely spreading it, because they're still very much concerned with just surviving, right? It's much more they might travel a little farther out, but it's also, this idea of pioneers. Every time that you go a little farther away from the place that you're used to, you have to completely set up from scratch there. You have to cultivate land, you have to do all of these things. And then once you have that, you can go a little bit further. We also have to take into account that there might be events that we have no knowledge of that might have, kind of temporarily halted things. We think about, for example, COVID, that halted our world for effectively 2 years. And, with things like farming, really interesting connection is that it's the domestication of animals. Where did the vast majority of human diseases come from? They're from animals populations. They jump from them and they come to us. And farming and domestication, suddenly we're all living together. And so I think, and I could entirely be wrong, but we don't have the historical sources to tell us about this. We probably had a lot of disease holding us back.
So I recently, this is very, very recently, I recently read about the Anatolian farmers who seem to have been farming around the time of the construction of Göbekli Tepe. And they came into Europe much earlier than we had previously thought.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that both of us at this point in time have not read enough about the Anatolian farmers, but I do think it's fun to mention, because if they were around the area of Göbekli Tepe around the time that the monuments were constructed, and their culture, it's not a civilization, it's a culture, and their culture went north towards Europe, northwest, could they have felt the need to construct similar structures? And if so, would they have used stone like they did in Turkey, or would they have used wood, which is much more available in Europe compared to Turkey and easier to construct with?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on obviously where you are in Europe, and as you said, about the availability of the kind of resources that you have, but also very much on the economics of the region. Because, somewhere like Turkey, and when they're building these things like Göbekli Tepe, if they have these quarries and they have sites established and they have all that stuff already, that infrastructure for being able to build them set up, it's a lot easier. So when they then move to a completely new region, they have to set up that infrastructure from scratch, and it had obviously that the materials need to be there for them to be able to use. I actually thought it was really interesting. I was reading about the Irish Passage tombs that Newgrange and Carramore both have, and how they have lots of other examples in Brittany, France, Wales, and Scotland. And the ancient DNA analysis has associated people from these monuments in the Atlantic region to these early farming immigrants from Anatolia. So there's familial connections between people that are buried at Carramore, Carrowkeel, Millen Bay, Newgrange, and it seems like these tombs and the people being buried in these tombs are different genetically from people that we find in other Neolithic monuments and the general Neolithic population of Ireland of that time. So this has led some people to think that it's potential that these Neolithic rulers were like kind of dynastic, so they were families that intermarried. They've demonstrated a familial connection between someone at Carramore and someone at Newgrange, I believe, a kin group who was doing this. So it's really interesting to think about that. If they are these people that are coming from Anatolia, then clearly they have brought that tradition of this megalithic monument building with them, but it just took them a really long time. And obviously they also have to, they're not going to be able to build these monuments all by themselves. So just because you come to somebody and you say, hey, I want to build myself a giant Mojo Dojo Casa house to house me and my ancestors for all time for you to worship. You just introduce that as a basic concept to somebody when you first arrive somewhere, they're going to be like, what? Right? So we have to give these are ideas that have to be given time to develop, and they need the economy for them to happen as well. I think it's and trends and fashion. I think we need to think about these things as well. I think a really good example of this is, the pyramids, which are not very far removed in date from Carrowmore and Newgrange, actually. These are structures that were built as burial monuments at the height of the Old Kingdom in the 4th dynasty. The biggest one ever is built. But then after the 4th dynasty, instead of just getting bigger and bigger, it declines. And then after the 6th dynasty, it kind of stops and they never reach the same pinnacle again. So the question is like, why? And I think one of the best answers is economics. They were huge projects. They needed a lot of resources. They are not sustainable. You cannot just keep building them. There's a lot of theories about the mortar used at the Great Pyramid and the amount of trees that would have been needed. The amount of trees that would have been needed to create it would have essentially like bankrupted Egypt of its trees. So you can't repeat that. So we need to kind of think about that, take that thinking as well and apply it to these things like these megaliths as well. They're not a simple thing to build, not even just in terms of the technology needed for them, but the economic stability. So, you need to be in a place as a civilization where you have the resources to build them. You have to have the technological development and knowledge. And then you also need to be not in the middle of a war. You need to be able to send your people to go build them. And but then also there's this kind of idea of so why do they not get used as much as well? Because if we're talking about them in the context of being tombs, when you they are things that come in and out of fashion. So it could be that for a while people just decided like, oh, we're not really into those, and then things cycled back around and they were like, oh, we were into it. Also, there's this idea of like grave robbing. It's not something that only happens in modern day. I think the Egyptians pretty quickly figured out that when you build a gigantic Mojo Dojo Casa house to yourself, filled with all of your best stuff, it's not the greatest environment to create if you don't want people to take your stuff. And the same applies for these kinds of megalithic tombs. I think, again, economically, they take a lot to build. And then after a while, you're like, ooh, these are not secure.
Yeah, no. And like, because while you were speaking, I was thinking, it's not just like the trend and the fashion, but for me, it's like, it took a long time for these Anatolian farmers, if they went all the way up to Ireland, how did they manage to remember or continue the spread of we used stone in the past? Because I do think that if they were to have gone all the way there and their culture progressed to that point, they would have word to mouth advertisement of we used to do this, tell your children. And then for many, many generations, that information was shared, I think, because how else would they have been able to sort of do that?
Yeah, you have your family stories, but also I think it's key to remember that people didn't live in isolation. So, they entirely likely that they had, familial traditions that spoke about these kinds of things, that maybe they brought some of that with them, maybe they didn't, but also as they go outward, that doesn't mean that they have no connection back to where they came from. You still would have people that would travel across continent, traders, whatever you want to call it. They wouldn't be living necessarily in these like completely isolated bubbles that have absolutely no contact back home.
And so if that's the case, because I like to think on the top of my head, like I said up front, like I want this to be like a conversation and you feeding me feeding you. If this was the case, like they had people in Anatolia and people in Ireland and they would trade among these, the regions that they would have crossed into during their trades could have been affected by their structures, or like their beliefs, or like the reasons why they did this, or the how. Because we can see this megalithic builder culture that seems to be separate when you look at it from a distance, but at the same time, the monuments do look similar, and they've used similar ways of constructing them all over the board in Europe.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it's like, there's sharing of ideas, there's sharing of technology.
Yeah, they could have influenced it at least.
Yeah, and also I think sometimes like a lot of these structures that they're building, sometimes they look similar because that's just the best way to build that thing.
That's what I always say when people say, but there's pyramids everywhere. Well, yeah, if you want to build very, very big, there's only one way you can possibly do that back in ancient times, and that's a pyramid, because it supports each other.
Yeah, somebody made a really good point once that, like, even toddlers who don't speak yet, they're just building things with blocks. They can grasp that the most secure way to build something that's going to keep standing is to build it with a peak in the center that spreads out. Sometimes it's round, sometimes it's like this. But
so like it could be a mound, a pyramid, but it's all a ziggurat. It could all be the same, like it's the original same shape, because the weight of the top will be spread evenly, so therefore it's the strongest.
Yeah, so it's as a natural shape, it makes sense. And that would be something that, you don't have to have one person figures that out and only that person knows it. That could be something that could be figured out in lots of different places, and then perhaps it can be influenced. It's really interesting that you talk about, again, these connections, because have you heard of the latest, the Stonehenge of the Netherlands discovery?
Yes, I have. Yeah. I have.
Yeah, outside of Kiel. So that's a really exciting discovery that's been made, which is 3 burial mounds from the Bronze Age, 60 men, women, and children that's been excavated. But one of the really cool things that they found in it was a glass bead from Mesopotamia. So this is from ages away, and I think they actually think that it's actually much older than the use period of the barrel. I could be wrong about that. I need to check.
I think you're right, yeah, because I looked into the information when I made my video, and I think you're right. The glass bead, I think, predates the Bronze Age.
Yeah, or even, for example, my site that I dug on when I was a student in Jordan, they found I think it was a gold scarab in this site in the middle of Jordan, which is not Egypt, and the scarab itself was older than the site, which again is this idea of like, objects don't stay where they were made, they move throughout, and they not only move throughout geography, they move throughout time. So, and
I mean, we do that even now.
Yes.
Historical artifacts, we dig them up and then we put them in a museum, or they get sold to like a private collector, and then it moves through time and space.
Exactly, things move through time and space. And like one of the key things that I think I try to get across a lot of the time to people, and I think you understand this pretty well from our conversations that we've had, is that ancient people weren't stupid. And even more so in that they had the odds stacked against them when you compare them to us, right? Like they didn't live as long, they didn't have as much technology, they didn't have so many of basically everything that we take for granted in the modern day.
Yeah.
They
I mean,
didn't
look
have.
around you. Like, they didn't have houses like this that kept you, like, actually warm and...
Or food, like guaranteed sources of food year round. So, in order to make the kind of advancements that they had to overcome all of that stuff. And so, sometimes, maybe they weren't building these megalithic monuments right away after they came from Anatolia, because they were like, well, I got to establish my farms first, or, maybe I need to take over these people first, or whatever. So that there can be lots of different reasons why, but also, as I said at the beginning, we need to have this kind of context that, that far back in history, that big of a time gap between these two kinds of things happening, is not really as big of a time gap as we think it is, in terms of like the overall development of people.
Coming back to like the hypothesis of the Anatolian farmers going like up to Ireland, they wouldn't have just taken one route. No, because we see Neolithic structures in Germany, the dolmens in Germany, and we have wooden henge monuments in Germany. Like, we've only found post holes of these wooden henges and their monuments, but I mean, they were there. They're in Denmark. But I also think like further east, we have Neolithic structures as well. I'm not too familiar about them. I don't know much about them, but I have read that they are there. We see Neolithic structures in Russia, but then and at the same time, we see the bulk of it in like France, in Spain, and Malta, and some in Italy, England, Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands.
Europe.
I mean, it's just, exactly, it's like Europe. Yeah. But the bulk of it, I think, is around like Ireland, England, and then we go down Holland, France, Spain, and then along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea back to Turkey. It makes sense that that was the easiest route to take, because it's probably the shortest. But at the same time, they probably went up north through the east of Europe and then like made their way to like Germany, and or like the other way around. Like, let's take a different route. I take the same route every day. Like when you trade, or like when you take the same route to work every day, it gets boring really fast. So you want to take a different route.
Also, like they were moving that way, but they weren't the only people. That was the Anatolian farmers in particular, right? There were hunter-gatherers in those places that they would have met along the way, who would have already probably also had established like routes. So, like, or they might have been exploring this way and they come across you, etc. So, yeah, there's lots of different, probably lots of different routes. And to be fair, like, with what we can tell, there's some really interesting tech has been developed in terms of like stable isotope analysis that's able to tell from your teeth where you were born, and like where like and then you can tell, like, you would be able to tell from my teeth, for example, that I was born in Canada, but then you would find my body in the UK, right? So you would be able to tell at some point I moved.
Yeah, because like that reminds me of the British soldiers that we found in the Netherlands. I think back in 2020 or 2021, we dug up mass graves, and then we were like, what, a mass grave? And how old is this? It could be Stone Age, but it could be younger, or like the 80 Years' War with Spain. And then it turned out to be around the time of the Napoleon Wars, like the French Revolution. And we dug up one of the mass graves. There are more that have not been excavated, and we are going to leave them in peace. But this one that we did do archaeological excavations on, the bodies that we have recovered have been sent back to Britain, and they are currently in the works of figuring out who these men were. Like, where did they came from, and do they have descendants that are currently alive, and can we bring them back to where they belong? And I think that has to do with the teeth analysis that you just mentioned.
Yeah. I think it's either strontium or nitrogen. There's a bunch of different isotopes that are in your teeth that can tell you different things, including, you know, how old the teeth are. Teeth are like a archaeological gold mine when it comes to being able to tell information about an ancient person that you're not able to glean from their archaeological surroundings. So it's really interesting and revolutionizing stuff. There's also some, it's the ancient DNA matrilineal tooth analyses that are gonna, that there is another kind of studies that are, or type of technology that's being pioneered when looking at teeth and ancestral DNA. And I think it's specifically mitochondrial DNA that is going to, I think, potentially revolutionize what we know about sex and gender in antiquity, because there have been multiple stories to this year that I've covered on my channel on Archaeology News, on different places. One was in Spain and the other one was just off of Cornwall in England, where we had Iron Age burials of people that we've always assumed, based on their burial goods, one was buried with like a sword and a shield and a mirror, and the other one was with some really ornate, like, I think there was like a crystal dagger or something. The Spanish one was, oh no, it was ivory, the ivory person in Spain, and then this other person in outside of Cornwall. Completely, they're not related to each other specifically, but we've always assumed they were men because the biological remains were not preserved enough to do a skeletal analysis. But now they've done this analysis on enamel fragments from their teeth, and both of them were female, like genetically female. So exactly. So that completely, again, was like upends a lot, like particularly the one that was buried with these weapons. It's like they assumed it was a man because they were buried with weapons, but it was unusual because this person was also buried with a mirror, which was typically a woman's grave good. So we were always just like, oh, what is it? So now we're able to tell. So I'm very, very interested to see this new type of analysis being applied further in more prehistorical context, and what that could potentially tell us about the sex, not necessarily the gender, because they are two different things, about the sex of these people and how that could potentially change and rewrite history of what we know about some of these like gender norms in ancient societies, because we tend to think of them as like incredibly binary, you know, women gather, men hunt, that kind of thing. And as we go on, we learn that actually they're a lot more flexible than we thought they were. And and that a lot of that is just us, again, putting our own biases, particularly a lot of the time with a lot of these concepts, Victorian biases, and putting them on these ancient people. So.
It's the same as like when people look at the hunter-gatherer society, the men were the hunters and the women were the gatherers. No, if a woman was probably good at hunting, she would have been part of the hunting group. And if a guy wasn't good at hunting, he would have probably been put with the gathering group. We don't look at it like, oh, you're a man, so you must be. No, in a society like that, in a culture that has to rely on all of its people to be able to survive, you will pick the people that are best suited for the job. Has nothing to do with gender or sex or whatever norms we like. Archaeologists from many decades ago used to look at it like that, and historians used to look at it like that. It was very black and white, and now we are in the age of 2023. We are in this modern age. We look at things from a modern lens, and we can see that we have black here and we have white here, and there's this massive gray area in between. that we didn't know was there for many, many decades.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples that one of my friends uses as well is like, a lot of these like lovers burials that like, oh, we find out like, oh, there's two males. Oh, they were roommates. They must have been best friends, right? Like
The Pompeii roommates, like
yeah,
things like that.
the famous Pompeii roommates. But again, this is what I've talked about, and the point that I've emphasized it through. I don't want to be too much of like beating a dead horse, so to speak, but this internal bias. We really need to be aware that when we're making conclusions about ancient people, that at some point we are putting our thoughts and our conclusions on them. And it doesn't mean that those can't be right, but we need to be aware of that is what we were doing, and then as well try and be as objective as possible. So that's why again we have like this system of peer reviewing things. You have people look at things from another. This is what you're doing with your hypothesis today in this interview. You're essentially peer reviewing it by running it through me, and telling me, and then we have a discussion about it. And like I said, I wouldn't discount it as it's 100% not possible, because I would never say that about anything unless I had a time machine and I was able to go back in time and check. But that being said, it is not currently supported by the evidence that we have, and it's not the most likely answer. So,
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm sorry that it wasn't like a resounding yes 100%.
No, of course not. But like that's the reason why I started looking into it, because I don't necessarily think that it's the case. In my mind, it's just a possibility. There is a slight chance that some of the structures that we currently see along Europe could have been reconstructed in ancient times. And then we come up with dates and like, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, because that's the fun idea, I think, about creating a hypothesis from scratch, kinda. Because like, I didn't want to come up with an idea that someone already had. And many people on my video were saying, oh, you sound like Graham Hancock. And I'm like, no, because I'm not going back further than Göbekli Tepe. Yeah. That's my starting line.
The difference, I think, as well, is that you're not trying to suggest that there's a completely older civilization that has somehow managed to replace only selective things. But
to me, like, Göbekli Tepe is the starting line of the civilization that we currently live in. That's how I view Göbekli Tepe and the culture that created it, because it predates so much. Like, it predates Uruk and the creation of writing by thousands of years. So to me, it's like the starting point, and it all snowballed eventually from there. And it took a long time because, as you said, we needed to be able to survive. And when we went to other places, we started from scratch. And lots of knowledge does get lost when you move. So
especially if you don't have writing.
Exactly. Like, couldn't they have invented writing a lot sooner? Would have made our lives a lot easier.
I know, right? All those stupid people. How could they have not invented this thing that we know would have been really useful?
Yeah. Damn it. But yeah, no, like, for me, it's like, I enjoy looking at it from the perspective of Göbekli Tepe, the starting point, and then what happened in the next thousands of years until we started making more stone structures. So it's that time period.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be fair, like, you are not the only person that wonders this. There are many archaeologists out there trying to answer this same question, but the answer is we just have to do more excavating. So
and probably have to excavate deeper in certain parts where we are able to find like something, and then maybe look a little bit deeper than we thought it could have been. Or like it could be in an area that we've never excavated because we thought, this is not interesting, and then it just could be hidden.
I mean, it's interesting to note that when I was researching, I came across a figure that was saying that as of, I think it was 2021, less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there are still lots out there that could potentially be uncovered that can adapt and change our view of the past. This is something I think people think that we excavate things and that's just like, that's it. That's
No.
it. Things are changing in archaeology and history and what we know about the past all the time. This is why
Can I make that idea even worse for you? Because that's only Göbekli Tepe that's been excavated for roughly 5%. That's not even mentioning any of the other Tustepeller sites, and there are like 12 or 13 because there's a new site that they recently come up with. Annie XD, Johanna James are currently in Turkey doing a tour, and yesterday they went to this new site where this man found that like nearly like a fresco carving of the guy with like the standing like that. I'll put a picture in it later. But Johanna was like looking there, and then she went outside, and then she saw a stone like erected from someone's front yard, and she was like, that looks like an arm, and that looks like the hand of a T-shaped pillar. And then the authorities came in, and the archaeologists are currently looking into it, and she might have actually discovered a T-shaped pillar at this new site that's currently like not open to the public at all because it's an ongoing excavation and they had like special access and all that fun stuff. But I mean, there's so much in Turkey that we have no idea about.
Well, there's so much everywhere. That's a pretty common question that I will get, which is like, oh, how much archaeology is there left? And the answer is like a lot.
Probably about 90%, because we've only scratched the surface, I think, at this point, if I'm going to be completely honest.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the times the limits with archaeology is funding, unfortunately. So, you guys want these sites to be excavated. We need to make sure that there's a continual interest in it, because at the end of the day, what archaeology isn't done so that, academics can sit in their armchairs with their like tweed patches on their jackets being like, I'm so smart, like puffing on their pipes and stuff, right? Like
if people were to just simply fund archaeologists and archaeological research instead of paying so much money to alternative historians, and I'm not even going to name names. I'm not going to name names because there are many, but I mean, if we were only to do that, like, holy hell, life would be different.
I think something else I will point out on that note is that you talk about people funding all of these alternative history people. Those people have so much money. Why haven't they taken that money and turned it into a dig to prove what they're saying?
On a silver platter. No, but like on a silver platter. I remember when I was young and I loved history, and I remember my history teacher telling me that if you want to make a good living someday and you have a good life with a good income, don't go into archaeology, do not go into paleontology, do not go into geology, unless you can work for an oil company. And I distinctly remember her saying that because I look at archaeologists and paleontologists across the globe. I see them on Twitter and I see that everyone is struggling. They're all struggling to get by. And my sister made it even worse for her. She's a paleontologist and her boyfriend is a paleontologist. And usually they say, take someone from like a completely different field that makes a lot of money so you can remain being a paleontologist. And they were like, no.
Yeah, that's what I did. I married an engineer, so.
But that's smart. At least now you know, like at the end of the month, you still have food on the table. But like two paleontologists, it's an extremely difficult field to even get work in, let alone both of you. And trying to still have a life next to it.
Yeah, I think definitely if people want to know more about these things, there needs to be more funding. And that's not to say that there isn't public support for archaeology. I think you go out and you talk to people, and it is one of the things that gets people really excited, and also is a really great way of empowering people and getting them involved in like their local history of the place that they live in. And certainly, somewhere like the UK, we have a lot of systems in place that do make archaeology like a viable career outside of having to be a professor at a university. Working as a professional archaeologist, there are people that make an entire lifestyle out of that. But, we aren't paid as well as I would like us to be. I think that considering how much, passion you can really feel coming from the public a lot of the time about these kinds of things, I don't think that we are paid on the same scale as what we should be. And I think one of the reasons why I started Inside Archaeology is because I really wanted to be part of taking back that narrative from these alternative people who get so much money for books and TV shows and all those kinds of things. And I wanted to kind of be part of that movement to reclaim that and restore trust back into the experts, the people that have studied this stuff, and also just making it more accessible for people, because I think that's can be hard times sometimes, like reading excavations reports. Like, they're boring. They're not fun to read. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not even sorry for saying that because it's true. But like,
the worst is the fact that I agree with you so much that I used to create videos on stone structures, looking at mostly at excavation papers, and then I shifted my channel. Why do you think? Because after reading so many excavation papers and being flooded with so much dry information, my head was empty and was like, I need something new to feed my passionate, historic loving brain, because it wasn't working for me.
It's the thing is that, like, people are required to make these official publications and reports, and that's not to say that they don't obviously have a place and a time, and they're absolutely necessary. But I think that there should also be, a requirement to create a more, what we call a popular publication for a lot of these things. You should be able, if you can write a book that's a monograph, a textbook on a subject, you should also be able to write a coffee table book on that subject that the average person can read and digest and understand. And that is becoming more popular, and there are some in the UK, certainly some bigger projects will like require that stuff to happen now as a part of like the funding for the project, but it's certainly not across the way. And it's also, there's also the issue of like translations if you want to get onto the international global scale, but we don't have enough time for that.
Too bad. No, I very much enjoyed our talk, and I think me and my viewers will have a better understanding of the ancient world and the possibilities that could have been or aren't very likely to have been. I think that's a good distinction to make, because I do believe, like, the Anatolian farmers going all the way to Ireland, I do think that that's quite credible.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that has been proven. That has been proven through the ancient DNA. Yeah.
At least the DNA, but it's not necessarily them already going there or like mixing with people in between that went there. So I think that's a good distinction to note, because that might be a future video for us that we can research and tell more viewers about. Yeah. So I want to thank you for your time coming on my channel, and for the people watching, definitely check out and subscribe to Rachel at Inside Archaeology here on YouTube. I'll put the channel here up in the screen somewhere on the left to the right, and in the description down below. of course. For everyone coming this far into this video and my talk with Rachel, I want to let you guys know that I've actually done an interview with Rachel on her channel. And when this video is finished, you will be automatically redirected to her channel to watch that interview. And be sure to check it out because it's a lot of fun. And don't forget to scan the QR code for Dungeon Hunter 6 or click the link in the description down below. This was my talk with Rachel. If you enjoyed, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click on that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. I want to thank my patrons and my channel members. Thank you all so much for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next video.